What if I told you that one of the most feared crime bosses in Israel was also a devoted philosopher? Meet Itzhak Abergil, raised in extreme poverty, immersed in violence, yet obsessed with books. From stealing Turkish sweets as a child to ruling an international drug empire, his journey is as twisted as it is fascinating. Itzhak Abergil, born in February 1969, enjoys portraying himself as a self-made man who, through sheer determination, transformed himself into an intellectual, perhaps even a philosopher, deeply influenced by the works of Nietzsche. Much like gangsters from El Salvador, he emphasizes that he grew up in extreme poverty, surrounded by violence, and had to fight for everything from an early age. As a child, he couldn't read, but he could easily recognize different types of firearms, since guns and rifles were a constant presence in his home. Allegedly, he was always hungry, which led him to start stealing from grocery stores at the age of 3, favoring Turkish sweets. By the time he was a teenager, he had moved beyond stealing and begun selling, though not halva or baklava, but drugs. His supplier was none other than his own drug-addicted brother. He started with hashish and heroin, known colloquially as Persian cocaine, and before long, the profits were significant. His mother, forced to work long hours for meager wages, had little time to look after her sons. His father, on the other hand, had time but spent most of it in a drunken stupor, waking up only to pour himself another glass. It wasn't until he landed in prison that Itzhak found a real mentor, Shmaya Angel, a legendary figure in Israeli organized crime during the 1980s. Their paths crossed behind bars, where the seasoned crime boss took an interest in the young, ambitious inmate eager to learn the trade. But before teaching him the nuances of the underworld, Angel started with the basics, reading and writing. He likely believed that even a gangster should be able to distinguish between the words bank and police station. Thus began Abergil's unexpected love for books, though it's unclear whether Angel had any influence over his reading choices. Angel himself died of lung cancer in 2004, but not before witnessing his protege surpass him in every possible way. By then, he was a free man, having been released early from his sentence in 2003 due to severe illness. Originally imprisoned for the murders of 2 drug dealers, Michael Namias and Shulamit Shelley, Angel had spent years behind bars before the court decided he had repaid his debt to society. Even at the height of his criminal career, Angel tried to maintain a facade of legitimacy. When he found himself short on money to pay his taxes, he resorted to selling a few of his firearms on the black market instead of committing more overt crimes. He was, in many ways, an unconventional man. Perhaps that was why, in 1980, he attracted the attention of the stunning Sarah Levy, who later became a well-known Israeli writer after their divorce. While it's doubtful that Angel inspired her love of literature, she had already studied biblical studies and literature at Tel Aviv University before meeting him. He certainly impacted her life in other ways. Most notably, she spent several months in jail due to her connection to the murder case that landed Angel behind bars. Though she was eventually acquitted, the experience prompted her to sever ties with the gangster world for good. For a brief period, Angel and Levy were seen as Israel's version of Bonnie and Clyde, even inspiring a song called Dance Floor performed by the popular singer Yehudit Ravitz. Levy would later have another run-in with the law, this time for drug possession, but ultimately, she devoted herself fully to literature. Her first book, The Angel and the Devil, was something of a confessional memoir about life in the shadows of the mafia. The Israeli public became so captivated by the world of organized crime that a deck of playing cards featuring notorious gangsters was released, with Levy included among them. In the illustration, she provocatively raises her middle finger, a gun in her right hand, and skull-shaped earrings dangling from her ears. When the card is flipped upside down, however, she appears as a refined intellectual, engrossed in a book. Interestingly, in that same deck, the Joker is depicted as a corrupt politician, bearing a suspicious resemblance to former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who had been accused of financial crimes. Returning to Itzhak Abergil, one of the first books to leave a profound impact on him was Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, pen name of Elisa Rosenbaum, an American author of Jewish descent. The novel, at its core, tells the story of an elite class rebelling against the state's oppressive policies and, in many ways, embracing the criminal underworld. Abergil once admitted that reading Atlas Shrugged was a revelation for him. Something about it stirred him, changed him, and convinced him of certain ideas. Perhaps it reinforced the notion that the state itself was an enemy and that those who defied or robbed it weren't necessarily villains. There is reason to believe that one of Itzhak Abergil's favorite readings may have been the Old Testament. A possible clue lies in the peculiar way he identified himself in court. Instead of simply stating his name, he chose a more enigmatic and carefully crafted response. "I can tell you who Itzhak is, but not who Abergil is. You will understand once you learn who Itzhak is." His words carried a weight that seemed almost biblical in nature, reminiscent of the divine declaration, "I am who I am," with which God introduced himself to Moses. Was this a deliberate choice, an attempt to elevate his image to something more profound, something beyond the reach of mere mortals? Or was it simply an affectation designed to bewilder those who sought to bring him to justice? For a time, the media was captivated by a particularly intriguing exchange, more precisely, an interrogation, between Abergil and the prosecutor handling the case against his criminal organization. The conversation, rather than focusing on specific charges or evidence, revolved around the books Abergil enjoyed reading. It appeared that Nissim Myron, the prosecuting attorney, was determined to make the case that someone like Abergil had no business immersing himself in certain works of literature. Among them was The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. The book's protagonist, Howard Rourke, is an architect who values only what aligns with his vision, dismissing everything else as unworthy of existence. The prosecutor pressed the gangster with a pointed question: what does Howard Rourke do with a building that wasn't constructed according to his design? Without hesitation, Abergil responded, "He blows it up." This was precisely the answer Myron had been waiting for. "So that is the lesson you took from Ayn Rand's book," he challenged. "That if something doesn't align with a person's desires, if it doesn't meet their expectations, the solution is to destroy it. Is that what you did on Yehuda Halavai Street?" The reference was unmistakable. Myron was directly linking Abergil to the bombing intended to assassinate rival gangster Zeev Rosenstein, an attack that had left innocent bystanders injured and dead. The prosecutor had expertly maneuvered the conversation into dangerous territory, using Abergil's own words to expose his criminal mindset. But Abergil was not so easily cornered. He fired back immediately, his tone sharp and cutting. "What an awful comparison. Maybe instead of treating real people like fictional characters in some movie script, you should ask forgiveness from those who were hurt that day. The ones who suffered, the ones who died. They deserve that much, at the very least." His response was calculated, deflecting Myron's accusation while subtly positioning himself as someone who, at least rhetorically, showed more respect for the victims than the prosecutor himself. Myron, undeterred, shifted the discussion to another book on Abergil's reading list, one far more controversial, Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The prosecutor suggested that this philosophical work contained fascist elements, glorifying the idea of the Übermensch, the so-called Superman who seizes control of the world in a godless reality. Myron insinuated that Abergil aspired to be such a figure, a man who saw himself above conventional morality, ruling through sheer force and ambition. This accusation, however, ignited a heated debate beyond the courtroom. A segment of Israeli intellectuals and scholars took issue with the prosecutor's interpretation of Nietzsche, arguing that it was a gross oversimplification and a distortion of the philosopher's intent. Nietzsche, they contended, had nothing to do with Nazi ideology. His writings had been misappropriated and manipulated by fascists long after his death. The philosopher had been deeply enamored with the culture of antiquity, not with the twisted racial doctrines of the Third Reich. One particularly scathing critique came from historian Zev Golan, a well-known expert on Nietzsche. Speaking publicly, he lamented, "It is a sad reflection of our society that a common criminal seems to know more about Nietzsche than a prosecutor who graduated from Israel's top universities." The remark was both a condemnation of the prosecutor's poor grasp of philosophy and an acknowledgement, perhaps a grudging one, of Abergil's intellectual curiosity, however tainted it might have been by his criminal background. Itzhak Abergil's intellectual performances, however dubious, were not unique in the world of crime. They fit into a broader pattern seen among criminals who had risen from poverty and wanted to prove that, through sheer determination and ambition, they had reached the level of intellectual elites. Many figures in the underworld, especially those with little formal education, sought to use literature as a tool for self-reinvention. They did not merely see books as sources of knowledge, but as weapons, proof that they were not just crude thugs, but men of depth and intelligence. During my time as the editor, I received countless phone calls from prisoners, many of whom complained about the pitifully small selection of books available in prison libraries. Most requested light reading, crime novels, thrillers, or action-packed fiction. But a significant number of inmates saw their time behind bars as an opportunity for personal transformation. They weren't just seeking entertainment, they were looking for intellectual ammunition, a way to redefine themselves. One conversation in particular stuck with me. A prisoner asked for a mix of crime novels, something along the lines of Ludlum or Dan Brown. But just before ending the call, he added a surprising request, and also, I need Plato. Curious, I pressed him for specifics. Which of Plato's works are you interested in? Perhaps the Apology of Socrates or something else? His response was blunt and indifferent. Doesn't matter. Could be the Apology, could be something else. I was intrigued. Why Plato? Do you think his works will interest you? His answer was both revealing and amusing. Everyone says that if you want to come across as smart, you have to read Plato. I couldn't help but prod further. And why do you want to come across as smart? Without hesitation, he explained, because I have a court case coming up soon, and I need to make a good impression. I don't want them to see me as some dumb criminal. I want them to see that I'm sharp, that I understand things. I sent him several books, including something from ancient Greek philosophy, though I can't recall exactly what. I never heard from him again, so I have no idea whether his newfound intellectual pursuits helped him in court. But reflecting on Abergil's case, I suspect he made a far more strategic choice in his literary influences. Instead of turning to philosophers from thousands of years ago, he focused on thinkers from the 19th and 20th centuries, whose words carried a sharper, more immediate impact. Quoting Nietzsche or Ayn Rand in the middle of a legal interrogation had far more dramatic effect than citing the wisdom of an ancient Greek. But the question remains, why was Abergil so obsessed with being perceived as an intellectual? Why did he go to such great lengths to cultivate this image, weaving philosophical references into his statements before prosecutors and judges? Wouldn't this kind of theatrical display do more harm than good? Instead of making him look sophisticated, wouldn't it make him appear manipulative, self-aggrandizing, or even unhinged? To truly grasp Abergil's motivations, one must look beyond his personal ambitions and examine the social and historical context from which he emerged. His impoverished upbringing and fatherless childhood were only part of the equation. The deeper truth lay in his origins as a member of a minority that had long faced discrimination and hardship, no matter where fate had placed them. Abergil was a descendant of Moroccan Jews, part of a community that had been forced to leave their homeland in search of a better future, only to find themselves treated as second-class citizens in the land they had been promised. The first wave of Jewish migration from Morocco to Israel took place over several years and was often carried out in secrecy. These families were not leaving their ancestral lands out of simple wanderlust or economic ambition, they were fleeing in fear. After World War II, as it became evident that Morocco would soon break free from French colonial rule and declare independence, the Jewish population of the country found itself in an increasingly precarious situation. For a time, France had afforded them a degree of stability, making them feel that they were not outsiders, but part of the fabric of the nation. However, with the rise of nationalist movements and growing anti-Jewish sentiment, the future of Moroccan Jews became uncertain. The Berber and Arab leadership of Morocco made no secret of their intentions. Once independence was achieved, their policies toward the Jewish community would change drastically. The anxiety among Moroccan Jews was not unfounded. Even under French rule, there had been darker periods, particularly during the era of the Vichy regime. When Marshal Philippe Pétain led the collaborationist government of France, anti-Jewish laws were enforced in Morocco in line with Nazi ideology, stripping Jews of their rights and freedoms. Yet, paradoxically, it was not the French who protected Moroccan Jews from the worst of these threats. It was the country's ruler, Sultan Mohammed V. Unlike other leaders in the region, he refused to bow to Hitler's demands. When the Nazis pressured him to expel the Jewish population, he defied them, reportedly saying that in his kingdom, there were no Jews or Arabs, only Moroccans. His stance likely saved thousands of lives, preventing them from being deported to the death camps of Europe. Even so, the years that followed saw a mass exodus. By the time Morocco gained independence, tens of thousands of Jews had already left for Israel, often under difficult and dangerous circumstances. They arrived in a young, rapidly developing nation that, while built on the idea of Jewish unity, had its own deeply ingrained social divisions. Jews from North Africa and the Middle East, the Mizrahim, found themselves marginalized, treated as inferior by the Ashkenazi elite, who dominated politics, academia, and business. Moroccan Jews, in particular, were often stereotyped as uneducated, backward, and prone to criminality. Abergil grew up in this world of systemic exclusion, where opportunities for people like him were limited, and respect had to be seized, not given. His obsession with books, specifically with intellectuals who challenged authority and defied conventional morality, was not just a personal quirk. It was a strategy. It was his way of breaking free from the image imposed upon him since birth. By quoting Nietzsche and Rand, he was not merely showing off, he was rejecting the role society had assigned him. He was demanding to be seen as more than just another Moroccan thug. In his mind, erudition was power, and power was the only currency that truly mattered.